Hello, and welcome back to the 20th Century Dude channel. So, there is a reason I chose this month's film selections the way I did. F1 just released, and it was a pretty fantastic experience in IMAX. It reminded a lot of people of the movie Days of Thunder from the 90s, but it actually reminded me more of a 1960s racing film, Grand Prix. So I decided to review that film as well, especially since I did watch it for the first time several months ago. The other film I watched was a film from the 1940s called Till the Clouds Roll By, and needless to say, there's a reason one of them is better than the others. It's definitely obvious. First off, let's start the race with Grand Prix. The movie is about a driver, Pete Aaron, who is fired by his racing team after a crash with his British teammate. The film, like F1 now, really emphasizes a sense of scale. For F1, it's made to be watched on IMAX, but Grand Prix was really made for the ultra widescreen presentations from way back in the day. And watching it in widescreen really shows how this needed to be watched on the big screen. To add to the immersive experience, Grand Prix, also like F1, was filmed as the actors were in the middle of racing, and it really adds to the feeling of what it might actually be like in the car during these races. It really is a technical achievement of a film. Aside from the awesome immersiveness, the movie isn't so much in the realm of story or character. The characters maybe aren't as likable as they would be in F1, and by today's standards, the plot comes off as maybe rather predictable. Though perhaps this wouldn't have been the case back then. I think the biggest problem with the okay-ish plot is that it's just juxtaposed in between these incredibly filmed racing sequences. But back to some positives. Also like F1, Grand Prix shows us that not every race has a happy turnout. There are many dangers, fatal accidents, and risks that occur on the racetrack. And in cases like the infamous Dale Earnhardt crash from decades ago, sometimes racers can die. A little piece of trivia. This film was supposed to include Steve McQueen in it, but of course he's not in the final film at all, instead with James Garner in the role. Anyways, while this film isn't the most complex thing ever made with a lot of story depth, I think it is nice taking a step back to a pre-F1 time to another film about Formula 1 racing. I'm not a big sports guy, and I certainly haven't watched a whole lot, if any, actual Formula 1 races, so it's not something I tend to keep track of, but hey, I do enjoy a good racing film. I'd go make a racing film myself if I had the resources to do that, and I do kinda have an idea in mind. The last film is Till the Clouds Roll By. And honestly, I'm not really a big musical dude. It's not my favorite kind of movie, and most of them I typically try to stay as far away from. My big stipulation is if the soundtrack or musical pieces aren't overplayed or cringy, like Frozen, and the songs don't interrupt the pacing and actually have a good story reason for being there, then the musical is pretty okay. The problem is, if the music isn't good and doesn't have a good story reason for being there, and is merely just a song shoved in there to be in the film, then it's definitely not good. If anything, maybe it's just because I'm definitely pretty picky when it comes to musicals, and it's not a genre I'm particularly fond of. Although, despite my disdain for musicals, there are always one or two exceptions like Willy Wonka, a film I probably appreciate more than I did as a kid. However, I will watch a musical over a romantic comedy because I just honestly can't stand those. Anyway, Till the Clouds Roll By is a fictional biopic of the real-life music composer Jerome Kern, which this film was supposed to be a send-off to, but it appears the execution of the film turned out to be a little less than stellar, we'll put it that way. At times, it feels quite choppy with the songs forced in there, especially at the beginning, and we'll get to the beginning in a second because it's a hot mess. The movie also assumes that you probably know something about this Jerome Kern dude, which I'm guessing 98% of people these days don't even know who it is in the first place. Again, I mentioned about the beginning, it's pretty off-putting. If MGM wanted to hook the audience in with a bang, they definitely didn't do this with this movie back in 1946. The beginning is probably the most problematic of the entire film. The scenes feel choppy, the music is forced in there, and almost nothing works. Back then, it would have been enough to have clumps of audience members simply just leave the theater. Nowadays, it would be enough to just make people resort to their phones, even though the theater ad told them not to. Anyways, the rest of the film goes back and forth between alright and But this send-off for this composer just seems to leave a lot to be desired. Despite the negativity, there are a few nice pieces of trivia. This is one of the earliest appearances of Frank Sinatra on screen. He doesn't show up until the very end, but he does end up being one of the better parts in the movie, singing a variation of Old Man River. It was also one of the earliest movies to have a soundtrack released around the same time in the movie coming out. Originally released as 4 78-inch records and then eventually an LP set, no official version has actually appeared on CD. It's also one of several MGM musicals that entered the public domain 28 years after production because the studio did not renew the copyright registration, and I kinda wonder why now. So, between the two films, what would I recommend more? Well, it's pretty obvious. That recommendation goes to Grand Prix, which wins the race if you want to put it that way. Till the Clouds Roll By didn't feel terribly messy, then maybe it would have had more of a chance. Again, I'm not a big fan of musicals anyway, so I would be more interested and geared towards the racing film. And yes, both films did have their fair share of problems. Grand Prix just outdid Till the Clouds Roll By because it was just more competently made overall. Other than that, that's for today's video. I hope you check out Grand Prix because that's the film I recommend the most. Although I suppose if you wanted to check out the musical instead, then you're more than welcome to. I'm not going to stop you anyway. Tune in for more 20th Century Dude content along the way. We have more installments of this series in particular coming, and I might make next month's video shark-themed as well. Hope to catch you on the fly. See ya.